The 3M Company, originally named the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, was founded in 1902 as a mining company that sold sandpaper made from imported Spanish garnet. Due to weak sales combined with the collapse of its first sandpaper factory from poor planning, the company shifted to developing unique products such as the world's first synthetic grass and products that would end up being household names such as Post-it notes and Scotch tape. For decades, the company has thrived under an innovative culture that had brought it to the global stage, and today, 3M sells more than 60,000 products in 200 countries in the fields of healthcare, consumer goods, worker safety, and industrials, with global sales totaling over $30 billion annually. Despite the global success its products have attained and 3M's self-label as a corporation with uncompromising moral integrity as stated in their mission statement, the company has repeatedly covered up defective equipment, the toxicity of chemicals that are now in the blood of 98% of the US population, and has blatantly deceived the public and the US military for decades, with the consequences just now fully coming to light. Join me as we dive into the two largest scandals that have come to light and how the $95 billion company's total resulting legal liabilities could now amount to over $1 trillion once the dust has settled. You may not recognize the name PFAS, but you likely come into contact with it on a daily basis. You might even consume it. PFAS, short for poly and perfluoroalkyl substances, is a class of chemicals that includes PFOA and PFOS, which are used to make fluoropolymer coatings that resist heat, oil, stains, grease, and water. These chemicals can be found in clothing, furniture, adhesives, food packaging, heat-resistant non-stick cooking surfaces, and hundreds of other consumer products and commercial applications. Let's explore how the invention of these chemicals gave 3M its meteoric rise and how they could now be the cause of its downfall. After World War II, a number of Manhattan Project scientists had joined 3M. They were familiar with using an element called fluorine, having used it to separate the uranium used for the atom bomb, and wondered if they could create other compounds using a similar process. 3M later acquired a patent for this very process of creating compounds out of fluorine in 1948. The new method that was devised bonded carbon to fluorine atoms, which created novel materials, most notably the birth of the PFAS group of chemicals, and specifically the PFOA chemical. 3M executives believed that this substance could possibly have commercial applications, and so in 1950, after 2 years of negotiating with potential customers, 3M landed a deal to sell PFOA to DuPont, which enabled DuPont to create a synthetic chemical used in thousands of non-stick, stain-repellent, and waterproof compounds named Teflon. After that, 3M executives knew they were in business. 3M continued to sell PFOA to DuPont for more than 4 decades, and it turned out the chemicals had massive use case potential. Starting in the early 1950s, the company continued to experiment with the PFAS chemical group and created PFOS, a closely related compound that wound up in hundreds of products, such as the products mentioned above, along with firefighting foam that 3M provided exclusively to the US military for decades. 3M originally marketed these fluorochemicals as the solution for your problems, and they helped the company grow to be worth more than $120 billion. But the cover-up of lab studies and deliberate ignorance of the harmful effects of these chemicals that got them there were not revealed until decades later. The EPA was first alerted of the risks of PFAS chemicals once they received 3M's laboratory rat study in 1998, where male and female rats were given doses of the chemical and then proceeded to mate. When a pregnant rat continued to get the regular dose of about 3.2 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, most of the offspring died within just 4 days. Taking this information into account, the EPA reached out to 3M and expressed that the study raised a number of concerns. By May 2000, 3M had stopped manufacturing PFOS chemicals and claimed that this was a voluntary decision with the intention of adhering to their corporate responsibility to be environmentally friendly. But the next day, the EPA came out to state that 3M had not acted with the intentions that it claimed, stating that while the EPA did not see an immediate safety risk for consumers using these chemicals, it would have instead taken the steps to remove the PFAS from the market if 3M refused to stop manufacturing the chemical. A year later, a scandal erupted in Parkersburg, West Virginia, after the discovery of Teflon made from PFAS chemicals in the drinking water of tens of thousands of people near a DuPont plant. A class action lawsuit uncovered evidence that DuPont knew PFAS was hazardous and had contaminated tap water, but didn't tell its workers, local communities, or environmental officials. The lawsuit also prompted studies that end up linking Teflon to cancer and other diseases. It wasn't until 2010 when similar cracks started to emerge in 3M's credibility, when the state of Minnesota filed a groundbreaking lawsuit and revealed that the company knew these chemicals were accumulating in people's blood for more than 40 years. The suit alleged that 3M polluted groundwater with PFAS compounds and knew or should have known that these chemicals harm human health and the environment and result in injury, destruction, and loss of natural resources of the state. The complaint argued that 3M acted with deliberate disregard for the high risk of injury to the citizens and wildlife of Minnesota. 3M settled the suit for $850 million in 2018, and the Minnesota Attorney General's office released secret studies and internal memos, revealing that as far back as 1950, studies conducted internally by 3M showed that PFAS chemicals could build up in our blood. By the 1960s, animal studies conducted by 3M and DuPont revealed that PFAS chemicals posed health risks. By the mid-1970s, 3M knew that PFAS was building up in Americans' blood, and by the 1980s, both 3M and DuPont linked PFAS to cancer and found elevated cancer rates among their own workers. 3M had known about the toxic effects of PFAS chemicals for nearly 70 years, but did not alert authorities until the rat study in 1998. Today, 98% of the US population, including newborn babies, have PFAS in their blood, and up to 110 million people may be drinking PFAS-tainted water. PFAS chemicals never break down in the environment and have been bioaccumulating for years in our bodies, along with the fish and wildlife we consume. Studies by the C8 Science Panel have shown PFAS chemicals are probably linked to 6 outcomes: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease, hypercholesterolemia, and pregnancy-induced hypertension. What began as a frontier of inventive chemistry now poses deadly health risks for the entire nation. As of 2015, neither PFOA nor PFOS chemicals are manufactured or used in the US, but both chemicals persist in the environment because they don't degrade. 3M has already paid over $1 billion in settlements over PFAS since 2018, and the company still faces more than 300 individual and class action suits pertaining to PFAS liabilities today. As of Q2 2021, 3M has earmarked an additional $490 million to cover further settlements, but this is a significant underestimation of the cumulative liability amount, which is believed to be several billion dollars, ranging from estimates of $9 billion to $100 billion. From the current docket of 300 cases, with the possibility of more to be brought on, the current consensus assumption suggests that the total liabilities will reach $15 billion, paid out in the form of both payouts to individuals, along with cleanup of contaminated sites and to further monitor contamination among bodies of water. This assumes an average payout of around $50 million per case. But there is now a growing possibility of a more extreme scenario that includes stricter rulings due to the Biden administration's stricter stance on EPA initiatives, and we could possibly see settlements in the billions using the $4 billion DuPont Chemours PFAS settlement as precedent. It's not the most likely option, but total liabilities for the hundreds of cases could reach upwards of $100 billion in this scenario, according to Bernstein estimates. That's greater than the company's current market cap of $95 billion. While the cumulative potential payout in PFAS litigation is significant, this next scandal we'll talk about makes this figure look like a drop in the bucket. Due to the increase of US military combat from the early 2000s onwards, there was an urgent need for military-grade earplugs. In 2003, Aero Technologies won an exclusive contract with the US military to supply its dual-ended combat earplugs. They were marketed as state-of-the-art earplugs with two ends to allow for flexibility of use. One end was designed to block most ambient noise so soldiers could still hear their commanders and peers, and the other had a complete sound-canceling effect to be used during combat. After 3M bought Aero in 2008, it took over the contract and became a giant in the military earplug market, as its earplugs were standard issue for US soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. During the height of those conflicts, the US military purchased millions of units of 3M's combat earplugs and distributed them to service members from 2003 up until 2015. The same year the military stopped distributing 3M's earplugs, the US Department of Veteran Affairs released a study revealing that more than 1 million veterans were receiving disability compensation for hearing loss, and 1.6 million more were receiving compensation for the hearing condition tinnitus. This made tinnitus and hearing loss the #1 and 2 health conditions respectively among military veterans at US Department of VA medical centers. It wasn't until 2016 when Moldex Metric Inc., a 3M competitor that makes respiratory and hearing protection products, filed a lawsuit against 3M and Aero, claiming the company committed fraud against the government by knowingly selling defective earplugs to the military. The lawsuit asserts that the dual-ended combat earplugs have likely caused thousands of soldiers to suffer significant hearing loss and tinnitus, in addition to exposing millions more to the risk caused by the product's defects. According to the DOJ, 3M knew that the earplugs were too short to provide adequate protection against loud noises during combat, and that the earplugs could loosen without the person knowing it, but sold the product to the military anyway. In July of 2018, 3M was forced to pay only $9.1 million to settle the case, and the claims remain only allegations as 3M did not admit liability as part of the settlement. This has fueled hundreds of thousands of cases that are now being brought by individual veterans that have suffered from hearing loss and other hearing problems after serving faithfully overseas, and 3M's resulting liabilities from these claims could potentially balloon into the trillions. How, you may ask? 3M claims that there are only 13,000 active cases relating to combat earplugs litigation, but plaintiffs argue that there could be upwards of 285,000 cases, as there are a much larger number of administrative cases rather than active cases, which merely requires a minor cost and some paperwork to move to the active docket. Before we dig into the simple math, let's look at the other cases that have been settled in the ongoing bellwether trials. Bellwether trials are essentially a test trial used as a benchmark to measure how the future litigation of the larger pool of cases will look. Since March of 2021, the bellwether trials have resulted in a 30% success rate, though 9 out of 14 plaintiffs received favorable rulings for an average payout of $17 million per case. This includes the recent groundbreaking case that awarded 2 veterans $110 million in compensatory and punitive damages, which sets new precedent for how high cumulative damages can reach. This suggests that the potential magnitude of earplug liabilities could be multiples larger than the staggering PFAS liabilities. Unlike the PFAS trials, there's a more accurately definable pool of cases here, which makes it easier to grasp the potential magnitude of the liabilities. Using the average $17 million verdict and a 30% success rate on the estimated 285,000 pending cases against the company, the total payout could amount to $1.5 trillion. If we assume the same 30% of plaintiffs receive a more conservative payout of $500,000 per case, that still amounts to $42 billion, almost half of 3M's market cap. The earplug litigation has largely been ignored by the market and by 3M, which records no liability on its financial statements. The recent $110 million settlement has drawn additional attention to the case and adds to the pressure that the company faces from PFAS litigations. 3M has built a global behemoth on the foundation of deceit, and the company could now face significant financial consequences for its actions.